The first stone struck the widow's shoulder before anyone spoke her name. She didn't cry out. She only tightened her grip on the weathered leather satchel hanging from her arm and kept walking through the muddy main street of Ash Hollow. The spring rain had stopped only an hour before, leaving the roads slick and shining beneath a gray sky. Every window seemed to hold another face watching her pass. Then someone shouted, "Murderer!" Another rock landed at her feet. If you believe every person deserves a place to belong, stay with this story until the end. Clara Bennett had lived with names far worse than that one. At 28, broad-shouldered and full-figured from years of hard work rather than comfort, she had buried a husband whose death the town refused to believe had been an accident. Nathan Bennett had been cruel when whiskey found him, reckless around horses, and deep in debt. The night he died beneath an overturned wagon on the canyon trail, people whispered that perhaps his quiet wife had simply stopped trying to save him. No judge had charged her with anything. The town had judged her anyway. Now the bank was taking the small boarding house she had struggled to keep alive. Every chair had been sold, every curtain stripped from the windows. Even the wedding quilt her mother had sewn disappeared into another family's wagon. Only one thing remained. Clara carried her father's old ledger, wrapped carefully inside the satchel. Years of livestock records, contracts, and careful accounts filled its worn pages. Most people saw an old book. She knew every number inside it could expose lies. She simply didn't know whose. As she reached the edge of town, a wagon rolled to a stop beside her. The driver climbed down slowly. He was taller than most men, his coat dusty from travel despite the rain, his beard neatly trimmed, his gray eyes calm in a way that made shouting seem impossible. He studied the crowd instead of the widow. Another rock flew. Before it could reach Clara, the stranger caught it in one rough hand. Silence spread through the street. "You've made your point," he said quietly. Nobody answered, perhaps because his voice carried no anger, only certainty. The crowd stepped back. The stranger turned toward Clara. "You headed somewhere?" She hesitated. "Anywhere that doesn't remember my name." Something unreadable crossed his face. "My name's Caleb Mercer." She nodded politely. "I own a ranch 30 miles west." "I've heard of Mercer Ridge." "Then you've heard wrong about most of it." A faint smile almost reached his eyes. "My cook left before winter ended. My foreman broke his leg. Half my books haven't balanced in months." Clara blinked. "I don't cook for strangers." "I wasn't asking." He reached into his saddlebag and removed a folded notice bearing the county seal. She recognized it instantly. A debt auction. Her name stood neatly across the top. The amount owed beneath it read $500. Caleb held it between two fingers. "I paid it this morning." The color drained from her face. "You... what?" "The bank accepted." She stared at him as though he had spoken another language. "I don't belong to anyone." "You don't. Then why would you spend that much money on someone this town wants gone?" Caleb folded the paper carefully before placing it back inside his coat. "I didn't buy a person." He looked directly into her eyes. "I bought time." The answer unsettled her more than any bargain could have. Before she could ask another question, Sheriff Amos Keller pushed through the gathering crowd. "You've made a mistake, Mercer." "Have I?" "The widow brings trouble." "So I've been told." The sheriff lowered his voice. 3 ranches have gone missing cattle records this year. Every trail somehow circles back to her husband. "My husband has been dead 11 months. "Exactly." Clara's fingers tightened around the satchel. Caleb noticed. "So why keep blaming the dead?" he asked. The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the leather bag tucked beneath Clara's arm. For the first time, she saw something she had never expected in Amos Keller's eyes. Not hatred, fear. The moment vanished almost instantly. "Take her if you want," the sheriff muttered. "Just don't bring her back." Caleb climbed onto the wagon. "You coming?" Clara looked back one final time. Not a single face in Ash Hollow appeared sorry to see her leave. She climbed aboard without another word. The journey west stretched across rolling grasslands brushed silver by the fading afternoon light. For miles, neither of them spoke. Wind whispered through cottonwoods lining the creek while distant thunder rolled beyond the hills. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "You've been looking at that satchel since we left town." "It was my father's." "Important?" "It may be." "You trust what's inside?" "I trust numbers more than people." For the first time, Caleb laughed. A quiet laugh, honest. "It'll fit in well at Mercer Ridge." By sunset, the ranch appeared beyond a ridge of dark pines. Smoke drifted from the bunkhouse chimney. Horses grazed peacefully inside broad green pastures. It looked nothing like the broken place people described. Then Clara noticed something strange. 3 riders burst from the barn, racing toward them at full speed. One waved frantically, another carried a rifle. The third was bleeding heavily across his shoulder. Before the wagon even stopped, the wounded rider shouted words that froze every soul in the yard. "Boss, they've stolen the breeding stallions." He struggled for breath. "And someone inside the ranch helped them." Caleb's expression hardened. Slowly, Clara felt the weight of her father's ledger grow heavier against her side. Someone had betrayed Mercer Ridge, and somehow, she already feared the answer might be hiding inside the book she carried. The wounded rider nearly slipped from his saddle before 2 ranch hands caught him beneath the arms. Blood darkened the sleeve of his work shirt, dripping steadily into the mud. His horse trembled just as badly, foam clinging to its neck after being ridden far beyond a safe pace. Caleb was beside him in 3 long strides. "Easy, Tom. Who shot you?" Tom grimaced as he pressed a hand against his shoulder. "Didn't see his face. They were waiting in the cottonwoods." "How many?" 4, maybe 5. "And the stallions?" "Gone." A silence settled over Mercer Ridge that felt heavier than the gathering storm clouds. Every man on the ranch understood what those horses meant. The 2 breeding stallions weren't merely valuable animals. They were the future of the ranch. Years of careful bloodlines, thousands of dollars in future foals, and the contracts that kept Mercer Ridge alive rested on those horses. Without them, the ranch could fail before winter. One of the older ranch hands spat into the dirt. They knew exactly where the horses were kept. Another muttered, "Means somebody talked." No one argued. Caleb helped Tom toward the ranch house. "Get Mrs. Harlan." A gray-haired woman hurried from the porch carrying a basin and clean cloths. Clara quietly stepped forward. "If the bullet passed through, willow bark tea won't be enough." Mrs. Harlan looked up sharply. "You know medicine?" "My mother was the only midwife within 40 miles. I learned because people couldn't always wait for a doctor." The older woman studied her face only a moment before nodding. "Come." Inside, Tom was laid across the kitchen table, while another ranch hand poured whiskey over the wound. Tom roared in pain. Clara gently pushed the bottle aside. "Enough." She washed her hands, examined the torn flesh, then carefully cut away the shirt. The bullet exited cleanly. Caleb stood silently against the wall, watching every movement. "No broken bone?" he asked. "No." She looked toward Mrs. Harlan. "I'll need boiled water, fresh linen, honey if you have it." "Honey? It keeps infection away better than most people realize." Within minutes, she cleaned the wound with practiced confidence. Tom's breathing slowly steadied. "You've done this before," Caleb observed. "More times than I hoped." Tom managed a weak smile. "Feels better already." The room relaxed for the first time since the riders had arrived. Mrs. Harlan quietly whispered to Caleb, believing Clara couldn't hear. "You paid $500 for the right woman." Clara pretended not to notice. She had spent enough of her life being spoken about instead of spoken to. Night settled across Mercer Ridge beneath a curtain of rain. The ranch hands crowded into the bunkhouse, speaking in low voices. Every conversation returned to the same question. Who had betrayed them? Caleb spread maps across the dining table while lantern light flickered across the room. Clara remained near the fireplace, drying her father's leather ledger after the damp ride. "You don't have to stay," Caleb said without looking up. "I'm warm here." "I meant with the trouble." She closed the ledger. "If trouble frightened me, I'd still be standing in Ash Hollow." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Fair enough. He pointed toward the map. The thieves crossed here. She walked beside him. You know that already? The tracks split. She leaned over the map. No. His eyes met hers. No. They wanted you to believe they split. She traced one finger across the creek. If experienced horsemen steal valuable breeding stock, they avoid rocky ground. Why? Tracks disappear. She tapped another location farther south. But crossing here, her finger rested beside a narrow marsh. The horses slowed down. Caleb stared thoughtfully. You've tracked horses? My father bought livestock across 3 territories. And? I learned to read the ground before I learned proper handwriting. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb rolled the map closed. We ride at sunrise. Long after everyone else had gone to bed, Clara remained awake. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The fire burned low. She opened the old ledger once again. Most pages contained exactly what she expected. Livestock purchases, brand registrations, hay deliveries, loan payments. Her father's handwriting remained as neat as ever. Then she noticed something unusual. Several pages had tiny marks pressed into the margins. Not words, not numbers, small circles. Each one appeared beside the names of different ranches. Mercer Ridge, Black Creek Ranch, Foster Crossing, 3 Circle Bar. None of the marks seemed random. She turned another page, more circles, then another. Suddenly she realized they matched ranches that had recently reported missing cattle or stolen horses. Her pulse quickened. Someone hadn't simply been keeping accounts. Someone had been tracking thefts for years. A folded piece of paper slipped from between 2 pages and floated onto the floor. Clara froze. She slowly picked it up. It wasn't in her father's handwriting. The ink had faded, but one sentence remained perfectly readable. The sheriff already knows. Trust no badge. A loud knock echoed through the front door. Once, twice, then 3 rapid blows. Caleb reached for the rifle, leaning beside the staircase. Every lamp in the house seemed to grow dim. Outside, through sheets of rain, stood a lone rider holding a white lantern high above his head. "Mercer!" the stranger shouted. "I've got a message from Ash Hollow." Caleb opened the door only a few inches. "Who sent you?" The rider hesitated. Then his voice cracked with urgency. "A woman claims she's the widow's sister." Clara's heart stopped. "My sister?" She whispered the words before she could stop herself. That was impossible. Her only sister had died 15 years earlier. The rider swallowed hard. "She says if Clara Bennett doesn't return before sunrise..." He looked directly at Clara. "An innocent man will hang for her husband's murder." Clara felt the room tilt beneath her feet. "My sister died when I was 13. The rider lowered the lantern, rain streaming from the brim of his hat. "That's what I told her." "And?" "She said you'd answer differently after hearing the name Eleanor Grace." The breath caught in Clara's throat. Only 3 people had ever known those 2 names together. Her mother, her father, and the little sister buried beneath a white cedar cross outside their family homestead. Caleb noticed the color drain from her face. "You know that name?" She nodded once. It was hers. Silence settled over the room. The rider shifted uneasily. "The woman said there wasn't time to explain. She only told me to repeat her words exactly." He swallowed. "Tell Clara the grave was never occupied." No one spoke. Even the rain seemed to disappear. An hour later, Caleb and Clara rode through the darkness toward Ash Hollow, accompanied only by Jacob, his most trusted ranch hand. Mrs. Harlan had protested the journey, but Caleb refused to ignore a message that carried impossible knowledge. The trail wound through soaked pines beneath flashes of distant lightning. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "You don't have to tell me if it hurts." "It does." She tightened her grip on the reins. "My father buried a small coffin." "You saw it?" "I watched every shovel of dirt." "And afterward?" "The grave was never opened again." Caleb didn't press further. Instead, he asked the question that mattered. "Could someone have lied to your family?" "My father never lied." "No." He looked toward the trail ahead. "But someone else might have." The possibility lingered between them like the storm itself. Dawn painted the eastern sky pale gray as Ash Hollow emerged from the mist. The town looked different, not peaceful, afraid. People crowded outside the courthouse. Church bells rang steadily. A wooden scaffold stood in the square. Jacob cursed under his breath. They weren't exaggerating. A man was going to hang. Sheriff Amos Keller barked orders while deputies forced people behind rope barriers. Caleb tied off his horse without a word. "What happened?" an elderly woman answered before anyone else could. "They arrested Samuel Pierce before midnight." Clara frowned. "The blacksmith?" The woman nodded. "They say he confessed to helping your husband steal cattle." "Samuel?" Clara whispered. "He barely knew Nathan." "Doesn't matter now." The woman wiped her eyes. "They say he also admitted to killing him." Clara's heart pounded. "That's impossible." "I know." "Then why confess?" The woman glanced nervously toward the courthouse. "They arrested his son." Understanding flashed across Clara's face. "They threatened the boy." Inside the jail, Samuel Pierce sat with swollen eyes and bruised knuckles. He looked up as Caleb entered. "You shouldn't be here." Caleb stepped closer. "Did you kill Nathan Bennett?" "No." "Did you say you did?" Samuel closed his eyes. "They promised to spare my son. They lied." "I know." Clara knelt beside the cell. "Samuel." The blacksmith looked at her with deep shame. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I couldn't stop them." "Stop who?" He hesitated. His gaze drifted toward the sheriff's office across the hall. "They've been changing records for years." Caleb exchanged a glance with Clara. "What records?" "Cattle brands, property transfers, debts." Samuel lowered his voice. "Every ranch they ruin somehow ends up owing money to the same people." "The bank?" Clara asked. He shook his head. "No." "Then who?" Before he could answer, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Sheriff Keller appeared. His smile never reached his eyes. "I wondered when you'd return." Caleb stood. "We're speaking privately." "Not anymore." The sheriff unlocked the cell. "Time's up." Samuel grabbed the bars. "You can't hang me." "I don't have to." The sheriff leaned closer until only Samuel could hear. "You signed the confession." Outside, the crowd grew restless. The minister climbed onto the scaffold. A rope swayed gently in the morning breeze. Clara stood frozen. "This isn't justice." Caleb looked toward the courthouse clock. "How long?" Jacob checked. 20 minutes. Clara's hand drifted instinctively toward her satchel. The ledger, her father's careful handwriting, the strange circles, the warning. She opened it once more, turning pages faster than ever before. Then she stopped. Between two account pages, she found something she had completely missed. Several numbers had been written upside down along the bottom edge. Not financial figures, coordinates, survey markers, land parcels. Her father hadn't been recording business. He'd been mapping something. Caleb looked over her shoulder. "What is it?" She turned 3 more pages. The same survey numbers appeared again, always beside ranches that had suffered thefts. Then she remembered something her father used to say whenever he balanced his books. "Never read only across the page. Honest men write straight. Dishonest men hide things in the margins." Her pulse raced. She rotated the ledger sideways. The survey numbers suddenly aligned into a sentence. Not perfectly, just enough. Ledger below old depot floor. Clara stared at the hidden message. There was another ledger. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "A second book?" "My father hid it." "Where?" She pointed toward the words. "The abandoned railroad depot." Jacob's face lit with sudden recognition. "That's county property." "No," Clara whispered. "It used to be." Caleb understood before anyone else. "If your father hid evidence there, the real records still exist. And if they do," Caleb finished, "Samuel's confession falls apart." A rifle cracked through the square. Glass exploded behind them. People screamed. Another shot followed. The second bullet buried itself in the courthouse door only inches from Clara's head. High above the crowd, on the roof of the bank, a masked gunman worked the lever of his rifle. He wasn't aiming at Caleb. He wasn't aiming at Samuel. His sights remained fixed on the one person carrying the ledger, Clara Bennett. She had just become the most dangerous woman in Ash Hollow.